But the fact of the matter is that the momentum is on our side and that we're winning and that we've won the generational argument and that millennials are radicalized.
Well, I didn't feel like staying up all night again, so let's discuss this right now because ultimately, whatever the outcome is at this point, the end conclusion is still the same. Tonight, we witnessed the long awaited Wisconsin governor's primary, which, of course, on the Democrat side features Miss Abolish the Police, Cancel Thanksgiving herself. We are, of course, speaking about the radical communist, totally not CCP asset crazy lady known as Francesca Hong. And this is not unexpected, but much like we just witnessed over in Michigan with Abdul al-Sayed, where a DSA communist was supposed to be able to run away with this election by double digits because, hey, this is the rising tide of the Democrat Party. This is trendy. Far leftism is popular. Once again, here in Wisconsin, we just witnessed another DSA communist double-digit favorite basically completely flop. As a matter of fact, as we currently speak right now, it's looking like she might lose the election outright. She's actually trailing by about 2,000 or so votes. Now, that could be subject to change because there currently are some 4 a.m. style ballot shenanigans going on and some questions over how the votes are being counted and mail-in dumps and all of those things in Wisconsin. So hold your horses on that. But still, regardless, it doesn't really make a difference in the end, does it? As a matter of fact, I am personally rooting for Francesca Hong to pull it off. We actually want the shenanigans in this case because obviously she's a much easier candidate to run against in November. But whether she pulls this out or she doesn't, it doesn't actually make a difference at the end of the day, at least for our end conclusion. Guys, ladies and gentlemen, what essentially has happened in these past two even Democrat primaries, which maybe makes me a little bit optimistic almost, is that the normal parts of America kind of struck back. See, we've heard so much over the past year about how, oh, Mamdani is the future and this DSA communism thing is taking over the country. It's becoming super popular. And even the polls, by the way, going in were seeming to bear that out. And what we've just witnessed is that much like everything communists have done throughout history, that is a complete lie. Actually, their popularity is completely astroturfed. And we're watching yet again better news for Republicans in the midterms because the more DSA people they keep platforming and running publicly and the more the radicalism of the left becomes a national issue or the defining question of the election, it's not going to end well for these DSA characters. This is a massive reality check. Maybe it shouldn't be surprising if you kind of interact with the normal parts of this country, but for people who basically live in their little gentrified little Brooklyn echo chamber and social circle where they think, oh, you know, everyone thinks like us. Surely me saying abolish the police and cancel Thanksgiving, you know, everyone feels like that. It's Thanksgiving's very painful for a lot of communities in this country. No. Turns out once you leave Madison, Wisconsin, Francesca, maybe you should have actually interacted with the state that you live in throughout most of your life, and this wouldn't have happened. But of course, that's not the case. But yeah, objectively, either way, this is good news for us, bad news for the commies. Let's break it down, though, and explain why, guys, in today's video. First, though, do us a favor. If you enjoy our content, make sure you hit that like button down below. Subscribe to the channel if you are new. That is the best way to support our work, and it also ensures that you can stay up to date with all of the latest news and coverage. And that said, so taking a look right now at the current results, currently we have about 94% of the votes recorded. You can see the establishment pick David Crowley, who I would point out did not really mount a serious challenge. You know, we actually covered in the past how they basically tried to get some establishment candidates to drop out and coalesce their support. But, you know, no one really was expecting much from this guy. You can see right now is currently leading over Francesca Hong with 94% in by a very narrow margin. Okay, he's only leading by about 2,000 votes. However, we'll have to see what happens right now out of Milwaukee, because when you look to the map here, much like we saw with Abdul al-Sayed over in Michigan, for example, in the college towns, she's sort of helping to run up the margins, but in the rest of the state, largely she is struggling. And that includes, of course, the major urban center of Wisconsin, which is Milwaukee, where David Crowley currently holds a narrow lead. But apparently what's currently going down, and as if we had to be more vindicated on kind of Save America Act issues, they are still awaiting some results. I believe they're mail-in ballot results, but not sure right now. out of the Milwaukee area, and that's basically the last holdout because most of the state has already reported their results. And what's currently being reported is the reason why this is taking so long is that there's currently a long delay of the Milwaukee upload because 5 of the USB sticks that the results were on were allegedly missing. Now, this has to pose some really major questions. First of all, why are the results on USB sticks? What are we doing here? Secondly, I don't know. Were CCP agents caught trying to steal the USB sticks and then manipulate the results on them? Who knows what the heck right now is currently going on? But that would actually be quite hilarious if in the end, Francesca Hong sending over her little communist to, steal some USB sticks. Not alleging that, by the way, that's obviously a joke, but either way. So we don't know what's going to happen here. Milwaukee is slightly breaking right now by about 1 point for Crowley, but especially if they're mail-ins, you'd probably expect that to go, the sort of Spencer Pratt situation again, where the far leftist suddenly runs up the margins, which again, I repeat, in this case, I'm actually rooting for that to happen for practical reasons. But either way, here's the context. Is that, ladies and gentlemen, regardless of whether Francesca Hong barely pulls out a victory or loses here entirely, it was never supposed to be this close. As a matter of fact, the polling miss here that took place is actually even worse than it was over in Michigan. Because I want to remind people in Michigan, Al-Sayed on average was projected to win by like 8, 10. I think the highest one had him at about 14 points. But do keep in mind also, Al-Sayed had a more serious challenge in Haley Stevens, right? At least she's not a great candidate, don't get me wrong, but at least the Democrat establishment had an idea, hey, this is our person. In the case of David Crowley, who has even heard of this guy? This guy basically came out of nowhere because everybody else dropped out. So he's basically just the not Francesca Hong vote. And take a look at the last 5 Wisconsin governor Democrat primary polls and compare them to the results. So the one from State Navigate, Hong plus 22, Hong plus 18 for another one, Hong plus 25, Hong plus 29. That is right. State Navigate's other poll had her running away with this election by almost 30 points. The other one, Public Policy Polling, Hong plus 20. And ladies and gentlemen, as we currently speak, not only is that not happening, she's actually losing by about 0.5 percentage point, right? So here you have on paper what the polls said was going to happen and what communists thought was going to happen. And ladies and gentlemen, reality. Couple key takeaways we ought to have from that. First of all, I don't know what the heck is going on with polls in this cycle, but largely it seems like they're not to be trusted. Even the prediction markets, the betting markets, which were laser accurate in 2024, also don't have a clue what's going on. And let me just say, these midterms just became a bigger wild card than ever, okay? I mean, we always say on this channel, do not get complacent, but now more than ever, you cannot believe anything out of polls. You can't believe prediction markets. The only thing you can do is put your head down and go vote. Arguably right now, this just happened with the remaining moderate, not communist wanting Democrat voters out of Wisconsin. They basically just said, we're not going to listen to the polls. We're not going to get demoralized. We're just going to go vote. And it turns out, look, it's hard to deny Democrats. Most of your party's taken over by communists nationwide. However, in this case, maybe we could learn something from them. They did, they just went out and voted. And now in reality, right? For people who didn't listen to the polls, didn't listen to media propaganda, didn't listen to communist propaganda from themselves about how they're the future of America, look what's currently going on, So I'm not a big unity guy with the Democrats. I think the divide is kind of too far gone. I honestly think in the end, still Democrats lose the Civil War in their party against communists. But, maybe that's that moment where you kind of sit there and say, there are still normal people in this country. That's very optimistic to see. But yeah, still regardless, look, I think when you really, break it down and think about it, it shouldn't be much of a surprise, right? What happened in Michigan, what happened in Wisconsin, on paper, these are things that ought to be shocking. But let's also consider, wait a minute, of course that's what should have happened. Because even in New York City, for example, Mamdani kind of barely won. Let's stop pretending as if he won 80% of the vote or something. Okay, not true. But even then, you know, you would think outside of a deep blue state in battleground states that Trump won. Yeah, it makes perfect sense. Why would a swing state want to embrace communists? What were DSA characters thinking by saying, oh, we should go try to win over there? But on the flip side, let me also say how pathetic of the Democrat establishment that actually, you know, when you really think about it, the communists don't have total control over the party, clearly, as you can see. But the Democrat establishment is too scared to stand up and let that happen, and stop that from happening, I should say, which is why my ultimate conclusion is, okay, even if they don't have total control, they are the ones running the Democrat Party. Because, for example, you look at the Michigan primary, where Haley Stevens, the establishment pick, who, let's not forget, is a highly weird, off-putting, incompetent person. We always made fun of her because she can't finish a sentence. She's supposed to lose by double digits, loses barely by 1 point. What was the conclusion there? If the Democrat establishment actually, let's say, picked a serious person who would have had to put their credibility on the line, probably would have actually won that primary. And the same appears to be true here of Francesca Hong, right? If Democrats had a serious challenger, she wouldn't even have a chance of winning. But what was the story in the end? What was so fitting about all of this? The Democrat leadership was not powerless to stop the communists, but they thought that they were, they pretended that they were, and they ultimately let the communists win, right? Perfect metaphor for everything happening in the Democrat Party. And by the way, to the Democrat voters sitting here looking at this saying, this is not what I want my party to become, well, maybe you have some life choices to reconsider. Maybe, you know, you could argue it's a little bit too late for that. Just something to consider. Just think about that, right? But still, regardless here, again, folks, just like we witnessed in Michigan, nice to see at the very least, these DSA people, even if they get across the finish line, headed for a major disaster in November, okay? And they're not nearly as popular across this country as they think. As a matter of fact, they can't even unify the Democrat Party that they're claiming to be controlling. Of course, as it pertains to Francesca Hong herself, hilariously, earlier, she appears to already trying to be getting in front of this, right? Trying to explain why, you know, her resounding mandate turned into maybe even losing here and why she's actually so deeply unpopular and collapsing and under attack. And I kid you not, the current excuse line is actually that, well, the Democrat establishment and moderate Democrats, much like Abdul al-Sayed tried to say after his primary, right, are just racist against her because she's a minority. And, you know, that's the only reason why, there's no other reason why you wouldn't want to elect this insane communist to be your governor. So, very typical.
And let's just be blunt. What is it about you, Abdul al-Sayed, Mamdani, even though you all are crushing it in the polls, that makes you an anathema to the current Democratic leadership and its donors?
Well, first of all, look at what happened when you're out here parading Liz Cheney during a campaign. And of course, you know, Mayor Mamdani and Dr. Syed and I just all happen to be people of color.
Oh,
and
I didn't notice.
They said this about Mandela too. And the electability argument is so tired. But I know that the expectations are different for us.
Yeah, well, as we all know, and especially when all else fails, you can always resort to the typical libtard strategy of calling people racist. It's not because of my own policy beliefs and positions that people aren't electing me tonight. I shouldn't be accountable for my own words and actions. No, they're just not voting for me because I'm a person of color. To which I actually have to say, first of all, two things. This ridiculous excuse by the DSA that people are only against them because they're brown is just insane, considering, by the way, who was the first prominent DSA candidate to run for political office on behalf of the Democrats? Oh yeah, it was the white guy. It was Bernie Sanders. The establishment did the same thing to him. As a matter of fact, one could argue, you compare the treatment of Bernie in 2016 and the treatment of the DSA in 2026. Actually, the DSA of now is treated significantly better. But of course, Francesca Hong, Wajarat Ali, whatever that guy's name is, right? They always have to do this, you know, freaking race grift all the time, right? Ultimately, because what? They're just a bunch of pathetic loser people who will, again, never be accountable for their own actions. And so that's all they know how to do is whine about racism. Which, you know, I will also say, look, as a Asian person myself, like Francesca, as a minority, I guess apparently a POC, actually, let me go on that point for a moment. Are we as Asians now being considered people of color again, right? Or I guess Francesca Hong is only a person of color when it's convenient for her. Because let's not forget, by the way, under far left ideology, Asians are not considered people of color. They're considered white, right? Like, for example, you look over in Washington, you know, the way they're classifying now Asian people, basically the new tagline on the left is that Asian people are white or white adjacent. Because, to make a long story short, on average per capita, our socioeconomic and educational outcomes do not reflect the narrative of racial oppression or the race communists in this country. And so therefore they just say, oh, well, now the Asians are white because they're successful and they're not dysfunctional on average members of society and they're doing good in school and all of those things. So, and by the way, Francesca Hong, just a couple of weeks ago, we showed it in the video. She actually leaned into this. She was basically apologizing to other minorities saying, look, you know, I have proximity to whiteness, blah, 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 self-flagellating herself even as a Korean woman. And now suddenly, right, now she gets to be a person of color again. I'm not really exactly sure how that works, which I guess in that sense, you could say does qualify her to be a POC then, right? Because I was reliably informed by the communist race hustlers, by institutions like the Smithsonian and others, that actually the very concept of things like taking accountability for one's own actions, being responsible and in charge and having agency over one's own life, you know, that in itself is a very white concept. That's actually a construct in itself of white supremacy and whiteness, and we have to deconstruct that, actually. So there you go. I guess in that sense, Francesca Hong apparently is a true person of color. I would be considered, I guess, the white adjacent Asian, and she's the POC Asian. I guess that's how it works. I don't exactly know. But okay, anyways, all of that said, that's the current situation over in Wisconsin. Looking at the results, apparently they did find some of the Minneapolis, or the Milwaukee, I should say, ballots. At the moment, actually, David Crowley has slightly increased his lead to about 3,000 votes, but still, we're going to find out what happens with those 4 a.m. ballot dumps. I would, however, point out, ladies and gentlemen, that while in some ways tonight was, you know, a repudiation of communism, North Korean communism, we'll call it. You know, it's worth pointing out on the flip side, the battle's far from over, right? I mean, in many ways, the Democrat Party still is a radical party. It's sort of just a question of how fast do they want to drive down the highway. Because over, you know, nearby in the same region, over in Minnesota, which of course this is Minnesota, so do keep in mind though, you know, this is not so much of a swing state, obviously a bluer state. We don't have to give the biography of Minnesota, but the Democrat nominee over there, I kid you not, Peggy Flanagan, she showed up here wearing a badge that says protect trans kids, a shirt that says protect trans kids, with a knife on it, which I ask, especially given the recent cycle of trans violence, what on earth that is supposed to mean. But that said, take a listen here to her acceptance speech. And so do just keep in mind, the fight's not done.
Because let's be clear, this is life-affirming and life-saving healthcare. When our children tell us who they are, it is our job as grown-ups to listen and to believe them.
Yeah, so I know this theme is super repetitive, but it is really just the same vicious cycle over and over again, which is the moment that Democrats believe maybe they found some semblance of normalcy or sanity, they can't help themselves. They immediately insist on drawing themselves back to crazy, insane, fundamentally losing positions, okay? For example, transing the kids. This is something that very often in the 2024 breakdown, a lot of people said, okay, maybe Democrats shouldn't have gone that far, right? And yet, what does insane lunatic here say in the acceptance speech for the general election, going into midterms, right? Yes, we're all for transing the kids. As a matter of fact, what a statement too, by the way, quote, when our children tell us who they are, it is our jobs as grown-ups to listen and to believe them. What? You know, you actually, you want to talk about crazy things that have been said by Democrats in this cycle, abolish the police, cancel Thanksgiving, all of that. I actually might say this could be the single craziest one of them all, right? It doesn't sound like a political statement in itself, but actually do just think about that deeply. It's the job of grown-ups in society to listen to young children and have young children tell them exactly what they need, right? What? So according to her, right, if a 5-year-old child feels like, yeah, in this case, the trans thing, right, feels like they're a girl, they're a boy, whatever that day, it's your job as a parent to fully affirm that, because totally it's not a kid. It's not someone going through a phase or something like that, or, you know, just normally like what kids do. It's not confusion. No, it's your job to permanently mutilate their body, because yes, the 5-year-old kid in a spur of the moment thing is absolutely right. And yeah, children should be listened to. In fact, they should be making the decisions here. Like, just actually, how crazy of a thing is that to say? You know, common sense, thousands of years of basic knowledge about parenting, and you can observe it just in nature and reality, is that no, it's actually the job of grown-ups to do the other way around, right? To tell children, guide them at least, right? Like, not saying you command everything a child does, but you're supposed to guide them in a direction. You don't have children telling parents what to do. What are you talking about? That's actually insane. And she just speaks it, though, as if, you know, it's a completely normal thing. And let that be said, okay, even if Francesca Hong goes down, here is a Democrat who unfortunately probably will end up winning, because this is a blue state, right? So keep in mind, it's not a swing state. Slightly different brand of politics here. But yeah, in the vicious cycle every single time. Every time Democrats think, oh, maybe we are maybe people don't think we're so radical anymore, let's remind them, they can't help themselves. These people really can't help themselves, right? Completely insane. Yeah, they may have almost or perhaps stopped the crazy, you know, totally not CCP communist who wants to abolish the police, but instead they got crazy trans lady over here who, you know, is wearing a knife and seeming to subtly nod at trans violence, because, you know, those damn Republicans, they don't believe in mutilating the bodies of young children who, you know, don't know what they're doing or talking about because they're young children. Okay. Is that what you want to make the midterms about, by the way, Democrats? I don't know. Good luck with that. But anyways, folks, there you have it. Let me know your thoughts on this in the comment section down below. Be sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you are new, and until next time, God bless and peace.